Hello. All right. Okay, we're gonna get going here. Thank you everyone so much for coming out today and joining us here at Amii headquarters, and to those on live stream, thanks for joining us virtually. I'm Cam Linke, I'm the CEO here at Amii, and we're incredibly excited to be the first ever AI partner for the Juno Awards and to kick off our Juno Talk series. To start, we'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Haudenosaunee, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many other peoples whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. It's in that spirit of gathering that we're grateful to welcome you here today. Many of you already know about Amii, but for those who don't, Amii's anchored in the Pan-Canadian AI strategy and is tasked with advancing Canada's AI potential. Proudly located in Edmonton, we drive the future of AI research and translate the science into impact in industry to continue to drive the field forward. AI impacts all industries, and music is no exception. From AI apps that help compose music to Spotify's Wrapped, most of us have probably had the opportunity to be able to experience AI's impact on music and sound, even if we don't know it. As the intersection of AI and music continue to deepen, the realm of what's possible continues to expand. And we're excited to show how we're applying AI to music and sound today and throughout the week. It's not just how we create music itself, but it's how we harness the power of music and sound. Studies show that music heals, and one impactful way that AI is being applied is through sound therapy. And so our first Junos talk and our first event, we're excited to showcase how AI is being used to provide non-invasive AI-generated soundscapes to help patients in the ICU. To speak on their research, please join me in welcoming to the stage Principal Investigator, Professor of Music at the University of Alberta, and Director for the Canadian Centre for Ethnomusicology, I hope I got that right, Michael Frickshop, and Amii Fellow and Canada CFAR AI Chair, Osmar Zayan.
Thank you very much, Cam, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Michael Frischkopf. I'm Professor of Music at the University of Alberta's Department of Music, and I'm here to tell you about a current project we've been working on for the last couple of years, funded in part by Amii, as well as Canada's New Frontiers in Research Fund. It's entitled Autonomously Adaptive Soundscapes, and it aims to reduce stress in the intensive care unit, or ICU, using soundscapes. This highly interdisciplinary project lies at the intersection of at least 4 main areas. We have machine learning, critical care medicine, music as medicine, and ethnomusicology, which is the study of music and its meaning across cultures. And AAS is right in the middle there. Oops. The intensive care unit, or ICU, is designed to heal, to provide critical care. But the ICU also presents its own health hazards. The main problem is stress, anxiety, delirium, hallucinations. Stress from the patient's perspective can be elicited through so-called phenomenological research, the lived experience of the patient in the ICU. Administering sedatives is the usual approach, but sedatives present many serious drawbacks. They have dangerous side effects, they're often not even effective, they're potentially addictive, and they're costly. So the extended use of sedatives to reduce stress is unsustainable from the perspective of both the patient's long-term health and well-being, as well as the health system itself. To date, progress managing ICU stress has been minimal. What else could we do? We need an approach that is safe, effective, always available, economical, and thus sustainable for both the patient and the health system. What new strategies have the potential to address this critical problem of critical care? What about soundscapes? What is a soundscape? And this is our definition of a soundscape. First of all, it's a steady state sound, but it's also non-repetitive, or at least there's no obvious repeats that can be detected easily. It includes things like the sound of a rainforest, the ocean, but also ambient music or noise. Soundscapes lack structure or progression, which are usually features of music. The soundscape tends to be therefore non-distracting. It emphasizes within music features called timbre and texture over things like harmonic progression or melodic progression. And so it has the power to modulate mood, something like an aural wallpaper. Combining natural, music-like, and synthetic sounds, a soundscape is not just an acoustic environment, as it's sometimes defined, and generally music is not a soundscape. Why use soundscapes? Soundscapes, whether they're natural, tonal, or synthetic, can be highly therapeutic, mood-altering. Research shows this. They stir the imagination and they transport the listener to other realms. Furthermore, the ICU, as you may have noticed in the initial recording, medical sounds in the ICU themselves contribute to patient distress. Optimizing the sonic environment of the ICU, or indeed any space, seems like it should be as essential as adjusting temperature or lighting. And yet, optimizing the sonic environment isn't common practice in the ICU or anywhere else, at least not yet. How might a soundscape transform patient experience? Let's imagine a patient's imagination as soundscapes begin to play. But maybe this patient doesn't want to be transported to a rainforest, doesn't respond well to these sounds. Perhaps he'd prefer something else. So which soundscape is optimal? The person can't tell us because in the ICU, people are not in a state where they can communicate and sometimes they're unconscious. Let's consider these soundscapes. Close your eyes a bit. I invite you to listen. Allow yourself to be transported by some of these soundscapes. And then jot down or maybe just try to remember what you heard, felt, and saw, and we'll discuss it. So, which soundscapes did you find most relaxing? What came to mind? Any responses? Who would like to be brave and tell us? Yes?
So the first one was kind of introspective, and send me back into my memories from the past. The second one was, I'm trying to remember.
It was kind of a rainscape. A rain.
Rain, yes. It sounded more like, rather than rain, it sounded more like an open faucet to me.
There was some white noise added to
Yes.
it, so yeah. Could be.
So it didn't bring up any like emotional connections.
Just like you forgot to turn off the tap.
The third one was like waiting for coffee, so it had an impatience about it. I wouldn't like to have that in an ICU. Yeah. And then I think the fourth one was the most relaxing to me, like the forest sound. Yes, well, it felt like early morning because of the heavy use of cricket sounds, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was very thorough. So you went through all of them. You can tell that some of them will evoke memories. So one of the ways that these acquire meaning is through your personal listening experience, and everyone has a different history. But some of them are also have certain interactions with your perceptual system. Anybody else? Any volunteers?
Yeah, I certainly won't choose the second one. I think it's the chamber music, right?
The second one was with the rain.
Okay, but this one kind of like a classical chamber music.
The third one had
The
marimbas.
third one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly won't want to choose that one because when I hear the music, I think I've died and gone to heaven.
So, we don't want that as the outcome, but maybe it can work for some people. So it's really interesting to see how people have individual personal reactions to these. There might be some that we would all agree are relaxing, some we might all agree are definitely not relaxing, and then there's a lot of individual variation. The soundscapes you just heard were drawn from a wonderful soundscape generator, which I can't praise enough. It's called mynoise.net. Very useful for whether you want to sleep and relax or if you want to work harder. It really has a wonderful range. So the first one is called 88 Keys, if you want to go back and listen to these. The second one is called White Rain. It mixes rain sounds with white noise, and often soundscapes do combine. And interesting thing about soundscapes is because they're steady state and non-repetitive, you can actually mix them. So a soundscape plus a soundscape is a soundscape. It has that closure property. If you think about music, that doesn't work. Music plus music does not equal music. Take Led Zeppelin and Chopin and see if anybody considers that to be music. Marimbas was the third one, and Summer Night. We have built up a big soundscape library with multiple sources, so there are online recordings that we've harvested from the internet. There are audio generators like mynoise. And then we make new recordings, either in the field or in the studio. For example, this coming Friday, we're going to be recording gong therapy expert Stacy Bliss playing her gongs. And gongs are produce very complex, highly therapeutic sounds. The library also contains multiple types. So there are the natural field recordings, maybe lightly edited. There's ambient music type recordings, which have more of a tonal or rhythmic property. And then there's synthetic sound, like white noise. And of course, these categories are not mutually exclusive, and we can mix them together in different ways. Now, the issue is that ICU patients may be immobile or even unconscious, so how do we select the right soundscape to alleviate their stress? It seems like it depends on two main factors. First of all is the patient profile, which is fairly fixed. Demographic profile, who you are, how old you are, where have you lived, maybe a medical profile, and then musical profile, particularly music that you like to listen to when you want to relax. And even we have the idea that we might be able to take such music and transform it into soundscapes through sort of judicious transformations. Then there's the patient's current state, which is varying. All of us have a current state which is varying all the time. So enlisting a trained music therapist to select recordings, and music therapy is an important discipline, or even to perform would be wonderful. But music therapists and musicians cannot be available 24/7. And I want to add that some music therapists react a little bit to this whole project, thinking that this is yet another example of where AI is taking away jobs. But I don't look at it that way at all. I look at it as another tool in their arsenal. They might play a recording even now, and this way they have another tool which would enable it to run continuously. So AAS comprises two different machine learning strategies in a way. The first is to look at many subjects and to see what relaxes them, to try to correlate the profiles and the soundscape preferences. So we're building a kind of a learning model, you might say, that might allow us to map the profile to some promising soundscapes, say about a dozen different soundscapes that are likely to work. Because if we have too huge a set, we will not be able to select among them in real time. And then using that smaller set, plus patient biosignals coming from their body, we apply reinforcement learning to dynamically evaluate each soundscape in real time and then play the highly valued soundscapes to reduce stress, hopefully. So now we'll examine the second part in greater detail. I'll take the analogy of temperature. Consider temperature, which is something that is regulated at home, at work, or in the hospital. This regulation is, as you all know, affected by a thermostat. So you maintain a fixed temperature in your home through an autonomous feedback control system, which looks something like this. You have the house air, which has a temperature measured by a thermometer, which is probably part of the thermostat unit, which exerts some control over your furnace and can turn on the furnace or the air conditioner depending on whether it's too hot or too cold. Right now, no air conditioners are running, but that might change in a few months. This system does not include biosignals, so when you think about it, to get a comfortable temperature, actually you need a manual intervention at present. But we could design an autonomous system also. So you maintain a comfortable temperature at home through the manual system where you have your sense of being hot or cold, and then you go and change the thermostat, right? And then that affects the temperature in the house. But we could also do it automatically if we had some sort of biosensor. So now we have the bodies of the people in the house. We have a biosensor that checks whether people feel or are hot or cold. And that could be a little bit complicated to measure because it isn't just your body temperature, but how you feel. And then that would feed into the thermostat. Note an additional problem here is that there could be multiple people in the room or in the house, and then you'd have to sort of adjudicate among multiple signals. So how do we reduce ICU stress? We do something similar. We have a biosensor measuring stress that gets fed into a learning agent, which is using something called a bandit algorithm, and then that feeds into a soundscape generator that generates the sound and completes the feedback loop. If the person is then more stressed, it will go in one way, in a different direction. If they're less stressed, it may stick with the current sound. What are the possible stress metrics? We considered heart rate variability, respiration rate, galvanic skin response, possibly EEG, although it's complex. Whatever metric we select, it has to be related to subjective stress. It has to be accurately and non-invasively measurable in real time. So some metrics, like a cortisol measurement, for example, where you have to send a lab sample, it won't work because it's not in real time. In the end, we selected as our first biosignal heart rate. The assumption here is that heart rate indexes ICU stress. The rationale here is, first of all, there is evidence for such a relationship in the ICU, and secondly, it's easy to measure, it's reliable, and it's non-invasive. So the system implementation is something like this. We have a patient, whether they're wearing headphones or maybe there's a speaker system. They're wearing a biosensor. We're currently experimenting with a watch by health gauge. And that sends a signal, this raw PPG signal, which is just measuring something about how the LEDs illuminate your skin, which is then interpreted by a phone app and actually can send a heart rate signal to a laptop, which is housing both the learning agent and the soundscape generator, which sends a signal back to the patient. So the loop looks like that. The current state of the project, we've completed a wired prototype version, and we're now almost finished with that wireless one that I just showed you. We've assembled an annotated library of over 1,000 soundscapes, which gives us plenty of material. We're developing also soundscape generators, and I'm working with composers who actually compose soundscapes as part of their creative work. We also built a virtual reality ICU for possible testing with healthy subjects. I'm not quite sure if it will work well, but we're going to try. We're beginning to run experiments correlating personal profiles and soundscape preferences for both healthy subjects and post-ICU subjects who have suffered in the ICU and also with post-ICU PTSD. And we're also completing a systematic review on the benefits of sound and music in the ICU. So we're soon going to launch experiments evaluating the prototype with healthy subjects using the wireless system. The research team, myself, Osmar, who's here to answer questions. Martha Steenstrup is also here. Marc-Andre Haley is not here. He's doing a lot of the implementation. Gregory Mulik and Nicholas Arnaez are doing the soundscape design. They're both composers. Shaista Mirani and Elizabeth Papathena-Soglu and Maria Ostroja are doing some of the work with healthy and post-ICU subjects. And then we're also working with John Butterworth, who's here, and HealthGauge with the smartwatch biosensor. And the full team is quite long. I wanted to thank the Amii, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, the U of A Vice President Research and Innovation Seed Grant Program, and the Killam Cornerstone Grant Program for supporting this research. Thank you for your attention. And happy to take any questions. Maybe you guys want to come up now, Martha and Osmar, if you want.
There will be a microphone.
Yeah, wait for the microphone so it can get out to the international audience.
Thank you for the presentation. This is a very interesting project. My question is, when you are dynamically changing the soundscape for a patient, does that impact the stress level of the patient, even though you are trying some soundscape that might be good for them?
So there's actually two separate phases that happened. So supposing you're going to enter the ICU because you have planned surgery, there's going to be some sort of serious thing, perhaps cardiac surgery or something like that. So there's an initial phase where we call it discovery mode, where the soundscapes will be flipping, but the guy is healthy. So before he's entered the ICU. So that's run as just an epsilon greedy bandit, because we want to make sure we don't make the guy angry while he's being tested to look for preferences, but yet we do want to explore. So there's the explore, exploit, trade. Then when you're in the ICU, you have a sort of a sticky random thing. So you play a high, that you've determined before, a high valued soundscape, and you continue to play that as long as certain things happen. So we have a threshold heart rate that would be set, for example, by the patient's physician. And as long as your heart rate is below there, it may be fluctuating, that's a good thing. If it's above, it's not. And also, even if it's above, as long as it's coming down, that's a good thing. And if it's not, that's not good. So anyway, I can talk to people about the exact reward signal that comes back. So in that case, you stick with something unless you exceed the threshold. And then in that case, you choose another high-valued soundscape, but not the same one. So you do not want to irritate the guy in there, and that's the reason for the two different ways that it works. Yeah.
Thanks, Martha. Anything else? Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for your really interesting presentation. Second, I have a question. Is the heart rate measured by the smartwatch precise enough for your experiments? Because the smartwatches, I think, usually do not have the needed precision for the heart rate.
This is a fancy smartwatch. In fact, they're HealthGauge representatives here. It's an Edmonton company. This is not one of these little things you get at, you know, the drugstore or something. It's a nice thing. So yes, I mean, we're hoping, we haven't run full experiments with our participants, yes, but it's not just a little cheap thing. So yes, it should be pretty good.
Yeah, and also we're doing averaging. So, you know, there may be fluctuations in the signal, which then get averaged out.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question about AI. Particularly, you mentioned that research was involved with AI, and can we get like numbers of patients or what are findings when it comes, and will you publish this research for the audience just to get, you know, specifics?
So we don't have patients yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, no, we don't have patients yet. So
Oh,
we
that's
will,
a,
we will run these experiments with healthy people and with post-ICU patients, but we don't have the numbers yet. And the more, the better, of course, but we don't know a priori.
Yeah, initially, it was impossible. This project took off right as COVID got started, and it was impossible to even think about working in ICUs at that point, or really with anybody. I mean, it was hard to do any kind of research. But now, it's obviously things are more open, and we're hoping very, very soon to have the wireless version working so that we can begin to run those experiments. And we'll get you numbers. Leave your email.
One more thing also, getting access to people who are really ill and running experiments with them, there are a lot of hurdles that you have to jump to do that. So, you know, even though we think, oh, this will be really good for these people, that isn't a good enough argument. So it's difficult to run. That's the ultimate goal, but that hasn't happened yet, and it won't for a while.
And that's why we will start with healthy people, not with the patients.
I had a question regarding the role of the patient in the whole process. Like, I'm very picky about my music. Like, I don't want to be irritated. So will the patient like be throughout the process, will they say what they don't like, or maybe give some of their favorite songs that could be used as inspiration?
Well, like we said in the presentation, there is a first phase where, based on the profile, we'll shortlist the soundscape. So we will not take from a very large database, and that shortlist is hopefully matching that profile. So the role of the patient is to describe the profile properly so that we will be able to shortlist it correctly.
Also, I'm hoping to develop some algorithms that would be able to take as input, these are the kinds of music, this is the kind of music I like in order to relax. Maybe actually recordings. These are the recordings I like to listen to in order to relax. And then sort of use that to generate a soundscape. Because the thought is that to actually be listening to music after a while would be irritating. That the theory is that the soundscape sort of recedes into the background and more colors the mood. But I'm hopeful that that's possible.
One question I guess I have on the side here is I was wondering if it would have commercial applications as well outside of medicine. In a sense, I was thinking of people who might have a hard time sleeping and can use music. And when it comes to the wearable technology, if it could connect to Apple Watches, I felt like there might be more application as opposed to just the medical space. I was wondering if you guys have considered that.
Well, that's definitely possible. You can imagine a smart home, not an ICU, but a home, and then we have to think about what is the biometrics. Is it the heartbeat, or is it something else? But that's the input that the program could get, and then we will try to maximize it or minimize it depending on what it is, using the same approach, but using a soundscape to have in the background in the house or the room. It's definitely possible. It's not exclusive to ICU.
Sorry.
Earphones. Yeah, well, the sound can come from a speaker like this or from earphones. That's fine too.
Yeah, it can be either, and actually it's uncertain now what will work better in the ICU, because if it comes from speakers, then the patient doesn't have to put anything on their head, but then everybody's going to be listening to it. And one of the things about those sounds that are so irritating in the ICU is that they're irritating for a reason. They're supposed to get the attention of the medical personnel. So, yeah, the beeps. So, you know, I can see it going either way. But I wanted to mention also, not only is it possible, obviously, to transport the same system anywhere, it also, if the person is conscious and able to respond, there's another kind of biosignal, you might call it, which is that they can just click on something that says, I do not like this, I want something different. And you can kind of accumulate those signals. And also, I was just telling me that Spotify actually does this already, that when you click through something, it starts to learn what you like. The other thing is that I'm sort of generalizing this project into another one I didn't have time to talk about, which is designed to address student mental health, or let's say people's stress levels generally, but I'm going to start with students because the students, I have lots of students, they're all stressed. Of course, all the professors are also stressed, so we're all stressed. University is a stressful environment, and they're right there, and they're kind of our charges. I mean, the students are, you know, they're your students, and sometimes things, really terrible things happen, and we would like to try to avert that. Furthermore, universities' mental health capacity to offer therapy is extremely limited. So I talked to the people in our Dean of Students office, they were enthusiastic. I went to the library, they were enthusiastic. So we're going to have spaces in the library where you can go just to listen. And the only difference is algorithmically is that it's no longer just an individual personalized system. So you might have 20 people in the library all sending biosignals. So then the algorithm has to be a bit more complicated to try to decide how to handle that. But I think it's a very interesting application, and I imagine it'll be popular among students too.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, so you did touch on this a little bit in your last answer, but like I was wondering like how you treat the different soundscapes, like whether they like you treat them as purely categorical or whether you try to characterize them and then like learn from to like recommend similar soundscapes to ones that they've liked before rather than just switching between and finding the like the highest reward in the greedy phase.
That's definitely a possibility that we've thought of. It's not in the first iteration. So the first iteration, after we've decided on the dozen or so soundscapes that we think can work, and they're all recordings, then we just switch among them. But there's all kinds of other possibilities. For example, I'm dreaming of algorithms that will generate soundscapes rather than simply play recordings back. That's definitely possible, algorithmic generation of sound. And then you can certainly imagine a system that will adapt through the sort of the parameters of that sound generation program. The other thing is that in our database of 1,000 or so soundscapes, there's metadata. So it's a possibility to figure out that, oh, this person likes water sounds, now let's explore the domain of water sounds a little more thoroughly. So instead of having 10 different soundscapes, actually MP3 files, you could end up with 10 different categories of sound and then be able to explore those categories. So maybe, I don't know if that's sort of what you had in mind, but yeah, we're going to be able to do that. And in fact, one of the composers has come up with a patch in a system called Max. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's a music composition system. So that when someone says water sounds, it randomly populates the patch with about a dozen different water sounds from its full database of 1,000 sounds. So that's a kind of a nice possibility for moving forward.
Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say about that is that it's a little bit different audience when you have healthy people, well, nominally healthy, that are stressed, that may be able to accept a little bit more exploration in sound. So if there are new sounds being generated, it's not necessarily a life or death situation, and they may be more open to listening to that. So it may not be the same sort of thing that you would do within the ICU, but in the broader soundscapes for health, yes, definitely.
In the broader population, you have more options, basically. We can have composers actually creating very interesting new compositions, which could be fascinating for students, but we wouldn't want to do that in the ICU. Yeah, so that would be part of the generative soundscape angle, that you can generate soundscapes algorithmically, possibly using little bits of pre-recorded sound, but maybe just generating it from scratch too. Or as I said, transforming music into soundscape. Music that you probably wouldn't want to play in the background into something that you could use to reduce stress and enhance concentration, say, for students in the library.
I think we have
Down
time.
to 0 questions.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
There are other metrics, but HRV is not, it depends on the device. Obviously, your great device, we can get this off of, but even HRV is just not one metric. There are many different things that you look at. There's heart rate variability, how much your heart rate changes. You know, when you inhale and exhale, if you're healthy, that's going to be a different heart rate. So if you're not doing so well, your heart rate variability tends to be low. If you're doing well, it tends to be high. But over the short-term measurements that we do, it's not clear to us, and from my literature review, that this is going to be a metric that we can use with confidence. I even saw a study where people were looking at people who were often stressed, and then they experimented putting them under a stressor, and everybody, whether they were not initially stressed or were stressed, heart rate went up. But the heart rate variability didn't change for the guys who were kind of automatically nervous, whereas the guys who weren't, it did. So I'm not, you know, again, we don't really know what the ultimate metric, but this is an easy to use one. You can measure it on almost any device, and we have some data that says that this is likely to be good, at least for our first experiments. Yeah.
And on that note, I would like to ask all of us to thank all our speakers today for joining us for the inaugural Juno Talks.
Thank you so much for coming.
Today's presentation will be available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. And please join us for our upcoming Juno Talks tomorrow. It's all about role-playing games and soundtracks. And then on Saturday, you can explore bionic limbs. So thank you so much for your time. I know we ran a little over, and we'll see you out at the Junos.